Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to our Department of Labor and Economic Opportunity webinar series focusing in on workplace mental health. As you all know by now, there's a Q&A box on your screen that you can submit questions to at any time throughout our presentation today. We'll get to as many as we can at the end. And if you haven't already, please make sure you sign up for emails on our michigan.gov/workplace mental health page. We also have a link to all of our recordings and other information there, including our report, the Surgeon General's report, and other great tools that you can check out as we focus in on workplace mental health. And as you all know by now, our goal is to make sure that we provide employers and working people with information about issues impacting our workplaces, the impacts on our mental health, and options for addressing these issues. So looking at the work that we're doing, we continue to talk about three pillars. So we identify those as things that are in the workplace. What are workplace characteristics that could be having an impact on people? Things affecting the workplace. So we think about trauma and trauma-informed, we talked a lot about before, as well as individual behavioral health supports, because there is an individual component to this to make sure that we're all moving in a good direction. And we try to make sure that we hit on one of these topics or pillars with the various content we do throughout our webinar series. So I get to talk about something I really love talking about today, and that's organizational psychology. One of my favorite topics, favorite subjects, and I always love the discussions that we have because in our outreach, I talk a lot about systems and structures. So with a focus in our work on sort of like chronic stress and what that does to people, we certainly believe in dealing with individual issues that people may be having, and that's important. But it's really clear to us, or becoming more clear, that we really have to keep a system focus or a structure focus, because seems like we can pretty directly link, at least from my perspective, some links between a system or a structural issue and the poor health outcomes, which of course includes mental health that people endure. Easiest example, of course, is that if you are in poverty, you are in a chronically stressful situation. So even if I work with you to teach you how to better cope with stress, if I leave you in poverty, we're not going to have the outcome that we need, right? And the same can be true of different kind of workplace conditions that we deal with, excessive overtime, you name it. Like there's things that are going on in workplaces that we want to talk about with structures. So today we're joined by Dr. Ludmila Praslova, who is an expert in all these areas. So for now, I'm going to go ahead and kick it over to you, Doctor.
Thank you very much. I'm thrilled to be here. Thank you for this invitation. And I look forward to discussing from the industrial organizational psychology perspective, for the most part, how to make our lives better. And I teach at a graduate program in industrial organizational psychology at Vanguard University of Southern California. But my particular emphasis has always been on diversity. I started my career in intercultural relations and global intercultural relations. And now I focus on neurodiversity. So you could say I went from the largest human differences on the level of nation states to differences on the level of our individual brains and psychological functioning. And that is the lens through which I look at organizational psychology and how our organizations are treating people of different cultural backgrounds, but also people from different kinds of neural wiring. And sometimes people say, okay, neurodiversity, what is it? And the broad definition of neurodiversity does include anything that wouldn't be considered typical in what our current cultural context. And it did start with study of autism, which is why many people do link it there. And autism, ADHD, developmental differences, developmental specific developmental differences like ADHD, Tourette's, learning differences, dyslexia would be something that comes to people's mind first. We also use the term neurominority for those sometimes to make it a little bit more specific. And then the broader term of neurodivergence could apply to larger differences in mental health, people who had brain trauma. We even talk about long COVID now as a form of neurodivergence, but sometimes if I want to be more specific, I say neurominority if I want to refer to things like autism and ADHD. So that's kind of my background. I do focus very much on how to get people to be welcomed in the workplace where they haven't been before because of differences in how they perceive the world, think about the world, intensity of the feelings that they experience. And I really, really find it fascinating talking to organizations. How can we make them more supportive of all kinds of human psychological differences? Now, and that's what my book is about, how to make organizations welcoming of all kinds of psychological differences. And I will share a few points from it today, but I will start with broader research that actually applies to everyone, because as a humanity, we are all neurodiverse. So some people could be considered neurodivergent or neurotypical, but humanity is neurodiverse, and we all have stressors that affect us in the workplace. Even if some people, like canaries in the coal mine, are impacted more, for example, people who already have anxiety, but everyone is impacted by negative situations in the workplace. And in general, we know that workplaces are very stressful. So this recent study has shown that really work is a major factor that is taxing on their mental health. And managers are a big part of it. So if you have a manager that is not very aware of psychological differences or the need to support people in a caring and empathetic ways, it could be as impactful as a major relationship in someone's life. So many people reported that relationships with managers are extremely important to their mental health. More people that are impacted by their doctors or therapists are impacted by their managers. And not for everyone, work experience is pleasant. Many find themselves often or always exhausted. And 78% of employees believe that stress negatively impacts their work performance. It also spills into their lives and influences how they function in their overall life, and it can influence their health. Many also don't feel like they can talk to their managers because they do not feel like they will get support from their managers. That, however, is just a part of the story, because managers are also very stressed. So many people, even on a C-suite level, say that they are considering quitting because of work-related stress. And middle managers especially experience stressors from every direction. They sometimes have to implement directives they don't even necessarily agree with, and they stress them out, and then their team members are stressed, and they say, what are you doing? You bringing all those impossible things to us, and middle managers can't do very much about it in many situations. So many middle managers are also highly stressed. So people on all levels of organizations experience effects of stress, and a lot of this stress is pretty structural and kind of embedded in how we do work. And sometimes we say we could even be traumatized by our work and experience mental health problems. Now, it's always hard to see what exactly is genetic, what exactly is non-genetic in mental health, but much of the research suggests there is a significant environmental non-genetic component in different forms of anxiety. And for depression, it is also a very significant component. So some depression is biological and inherited and genetic, But environmental triggers, experiences, bullying in the workplace, those things can also very much trigger depression. And then we talk about things like post-traumatic stress disorder, or what was called in Europe prolonged duress stress disorder, something that can happen from grinding stress over and over and over again, is largely environmental. Burnout, moral injury, something else that I've been studying, are largely environmental. So in this slide, I tried to separate what happens in organizations and how we respond to it. Because sometimes people say, I have a lot of stress, which is kind of a shortcut to say there's a lot of stressors and external injurious events that impact me that exceed my ability to cope and my resources. So when stressors exceed our ability to cope, that is a situation when we start developing responses that could be health consequences. We can have headaches, stomach aches, we can cry, we can develop depression, we can develop a drinking issue as a behavioral problem. So those are responses to stressors and traumatic events. When we talk specifically about workplaces, it could be chronic workplaces such as lack of resources, bullying, other chronic work stressors, bad relationships in the team that can lead to burnout. And it's not a mental health problem, but in many ways, it does overlap with some of the mental health conditions, such as exhaustion and low sense of personal efficacy. You feel like you're not accomplishing anything, that can spill into thinking, what am I good for? You lose the ability to care. And that can be pretty significant consequence of bad work environments, but it's not the only one. Another one that people talk about less is morally stressing or injurious events that can lead to moral injury. So, for example, you're told to use building materials that you know are toxic but are cheaper, and you're building something that you know is going to be toxic to people, and people tell you, like, hush, hush, that we're not using those bad materials. Or you signed up to be a teacher, you signed up to be a doctor, but you don't have resources to do your job. You're not able to help people, and you signed up to be helping people. That all can lead to the sense of shame and guilt, and why am I doing this? And am I even a good person for working in that organization? So that can also be highly distressing. And then if we have many of those factors plus adversities, so it sounds like you've been mentioning those problems as well in your studies. So if there's poverty, racial trauma, other issues, that all of this can leave people in the state of demoralization, because it's just like, everything is bad in my life. I'm trying my hardest. I'm still in poverty. The work is extremely stressful. So that might be another form of reaction to those difficult circumstances that eventually could be taxing on our entire being. And when people try to create interventions, very often they say, okay, let's do resilience training and help people to be more resilient. We'll do self-care, give people a spa package once a year. Well, this is from one of my Harvard Business Review articles. If you rinse off a pickle and put it back into the brine, you know what's going to happen. We can work on individuals all we want and try to, give them yoga during lunchtime. But if we're sending them into the same stressful work environments, they eventually are going to experience the same problems, which is why systemic interventions are something that can lead to more lasting results that will apply to everyone in the workplace. So Policies to address overwork, to address constant on. Many countries in the world have implemented no contact outside of work hours. In US, we don't have that. Bosses can message people at any time, and you don't have to be high-level doctor. It could be anybody, and your bosses sometimes could just demand that you work all the time and respond to your emails at any time of the day. That can be very stressful. So policies to address those sorts of issues on the level of organization can also help. Policies to curb bullying, because bullying is a problem of opportunity. If organizations limit opportunities, bullying is less likely to occur. And then we can also destigmatize mental health and allow people to take leaves for mental health, leaves for stress. Germany, for example, has a burnout leave that's very generous. Again, can be on the national level, can also be on the organizational level. Organizations can say, occasional mental health days are okay, and you don't have to beg, plead, and feel embarrassed about it, because sometimes people just need to sleep for a day and then they feel better. And speaking of sleep, schedules that allow for sufficient sleep are huge for our mental health and our physical health. And then support for inclusion and belonging, which again could be on the basis of our large culture characteristics, but also on the basis of our individual characteristics and individual differences when I talk about neurodiversity and neuroinclusion. And we do know that belonging is very important for our functioning. It is associated with less anxiety, less depression, better health. And it looks like you looked at US Surgeon General research. There's also a lot of other research that links belonging to many positive outcomes, all areas of well-being. But many organizations don't do belonging well. They say, okay, we expect people to belong. That doesn't happen that easily. If people are treated as, do your work and don't think you're just here to do your job as a warm body, or you're here to do the job, but don't bring your emotions into the workplace, we're not going to experience belonging because we're not fully included. So my most recent article that just actually came out a couple of days ago, and that is in turn based on my book, talks about 4 aspects of belonging that lead to the sense of wellness and belonging in the workplace. And one is social inclusion. And sometimes people say, yeah, of course it's included. We have this annual party in our organization. Well, this annual party happens to be a sporting event. So not everyone necessarily is into that. Or it's some other kind of event that only appeals to some people. And unless you're that kind of person, you don't feel like you're fit. And people are telling you you're not a fit. And that can harm the sense of social inclusion. And then think about your training. Were you given training in a way you learn? If not, then maybe you didn't feel cognitively included, because some of us learn from reading and some of us learn from videos. If our organization only happens to provide training in a way that is not something that in the best agreement with our brain, we may not feel cognitive inclusion. And don't get me started on emotional inclusion, because I'm a crier, and many times I was told that crying is unprofessional, and I can't help it. It's physiological. And as long as people are doing their jobs, why can't they also be human? Why impose particular emotional expression rules that in some cases are ableist, and demand that people forget their cultural ways of expressing themselves? So supporting emotional experience is something that is very important for whether or not we feel like we fit. And then sometimes organizations tell us you belong. And we can't regulate the temperature and we're sweating and we're dying in those warehouses in some extreme cases, or we just, in the office building where air conditioning is set to the preference of one person who likes it very cold and everyone else is shivering. So all those things can add up to the sense of not having belonging, which is why we really need to address all the different aspects of organizational functioning and how welcoming our workplaces are to really support all kinds of differences that exist within us. So again, I have way more points on that. Just something that I will stress here for social inclusion. Sometimes people say you're not engaged, you're not committed, because you're just not naturally this person who loves to shout about how committed they are. They might be quietly doing amazing work. They're just not a self-promoter. So assuming that someone is not socially committed and doesn't care just on the basis of very extrinsic characteristics can be very exclusionary. So a look at people in what they do, how they express their social commitment, and being invited to the party and being invited to the table, when we talk about inclusion, it's not one size fits all. We need to create organizations where different kinds of personalities, introverts and extroverts, could feel like they can contribute and participate. We don't want to force people to be something they are not because we decided we only like this particular type of person, let's say an extrovert, because that will alienate many, many wonderful humans and wonderful performers. And then cognitive inclusion, communication, training methods, and productivity methods. Sometimes organizations slice our work time into tiny pieces because there's meetings and all kinds of other things, and we don't have enough to focus on something that we're doing. Sometimes we need stretches of 3 or 4 hours. Scheduling can be part of cognitive inclusion. Allowing people to do work at the time when it aligns with their biological rhythms can also be a part of cognitive inclusion. And we should give it to people as much as possible, because usually those adjustments don't cost anything but mean the world to people. And then emotional inclusion. Don't be judgmental and say that, "Why are you so happy?" or "Why are you crying? Crying is unprofessional." There is a full range of normal human emotion that's not harmful, and allowing people space and time and support for emotional processing is something, again, that means the world to people. And the same thing for physical and sensory inclusion. Sometimes people say, well, okay, we have noise protection. Noise protection for the OSHA rules is not the same as psychological protection from noise. Psychological protection requires much lower levels, because even something that's not deemed harmful in the way it's going to rupture your eardrums, it can be extremely harmful psychologically. So thinking about how physical environment affects us psychologically is also a very important part of taking care of people in the workplace. And obviously those things don't come from anywhere. And we need to provide mental health and well-being awareness for leaders as well as for all employees. And they don't have to be therapists. We know that therapist is a separate occupation, but simply being kind to each other, understanding that people are different, that sometimes we need to communicate differently, that when we ask someone how are they doing, we actually mean it and we care to listen to their answer. Those are small things that we all can do in every position. And if we're more aware that sometimes people have bad days, and that's okay. We just tell them, I'm here to support you. And if things become more than you think you can handle, then you can think about bringing in additional help. But very often, if we just treat people with kindness, it doesn't even have to go to the level of a mental health issue where we have to bring in professional therapists. So prevention are really something that we want to stress in the workplace. And I'm happy to go to Q&A very soon. If anyone wants to find me, I'm very easy to find on LinkedIn. Just Google my name, and I come up because my name is pretty unique. So I am going to stop sharing and take any questions that you might have.
Yeah, sure. I'll take the first one because it's really easy, Doctor. But someone asked they get a copy of the presentation. If you're signed up for our emails, you'll get a recap of this in a day or so, and the slides will be attached as a PDF. So certainly you can have those. I really love many of the things that you said. I wanted to jump in though to this premise for all of us. I think about and I talk about quite often. In Michigan especially, we talk a lot about how Henry Ford developed the manufacturing process, and I remind everybody that he did that without consideration of whether or not humans could do something. And it was basically getting the thing from start to finish and jam the people in. So when we look at our workplaces, often it's like, hey, I want to do this thing, whatever it is. And then I just jam the humans in there, and they're supposed to just fit. So I like that you talked about neurodiversity, and the technical way I explain it, Doctor, is any workplace is just a ragtag crew of misfits that are brought together around a common cause, and we're all going to be different. Can you touch a little more on sort of how managers, I like too, so many things you said. I always remind everybody, C-suite on down, like this is all happening to you too. It's not just, Sean, the employee. Can you talk a little more about how that sort of ragtag crew of misfits, like, what are some like quick wins that we might be able to look at and say like, hey, this is how we can be more open, welcoming to many of the points that you made. I know it's a journey, not a destination. We get that, but are there some like quicker wins that we could try to have out there?
Good question. And I do talk about it in my book a little bit. It's different for every organization. And the quick win in your organization is whatever your pain point is. So do a quick survey of your organizations. It could be scheduling. Maybe scheduling is a mess and everybody hates what they get because they can't trade. And if people could just trade, that would help them. Or it could be the music that plays on the background that is driving 75% of the wall. So whatever majority of your people agrees on, and will provide a coalition of support for that quick win, whatever it is, addressing a particular pain point that many people find as a pain point. That is a quick win that's going to bring you very significant dividends. And then you can start being more systemic and start looking at what's happening during hiring, what's happening during performance management. It could be a performance management system is horrid and people cry and get depressed because it's so stressful. It could be that your onboarding is really bad because everyone has to watch this video for two hours and they can't even stop it for 2 minutes to go to the bathroom, and it's just completely ridiculous. So fix whatever the most ridiculous thing is first, and then look for the next most stressful and ridiculous thing within your organization. But then you can also be more planful and say, we're going to address this entire talent cycle, but early quick wins, whatever your pain points are.
Yeah, and I love the your connection. We have used the concept that 50 to 60% of depression is outside of genetics, right? I didn't really know the anxiety one. So 70% of anxiety be connected to environmental considerations is huge. Yeah. And when we talk about chronic stress, anxiety and depression are the two most prevalent outcomes of chronic stress, right? So it's really interesting that you do that there. I do want to mention or have you just real quick, probably wrap up here in just a minute. I consider myself an introvert. We always say like extroverts get promoted, introverts do all the work. And companies want you to go to the party. Like, I don't want to go to the party. I apologize. It's not you, it's me. I don't want to go to the party. So what are other alternatives for employers that are trying to develop employee engagement, but recognize that not all of us feel comfortable in certain settings. Like, are there certain things that you advise people to try?
Absolutely. When we talk about social life, it should come in multiple forms. And sometimes it's small group interactions. Sometimes it's even online interactions because some people are more comfortable in that format. Sometimes it's getting your input in more than one way, because if you can only give an input by yelling over someone during the meeting, then, well, we know who will win. If we provide multiple ways to give input before, after, in writing, introverts are much happier. And so introverts like to socialize. They just don't like big, loud parties. But if we also allow times and spaces, physical spaces, to, chat in a quiet place with a person and have a deep conversation rather than 1,700 shallow hellos that you can't remember what they were, your introverts are going to be much happier and also much more connected, because we want relationships. We just treat them differently.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that's about time already, if you can believe it, Dr. Preslova. I really appreciate you being with us today. I really appreciate everybody participating. If you go to michigan.gov workplace mental health, get on our email list, you'll get the slides as well as the video recording of what we did today. You can find the links to all of our recordings that we've done on there, and we will continue to have this wonderful discussion about workplace mental health. And today, of course, one of my favorite topics where we're talking about like how we structure things. So thank you so much for joining us, and we will see you next time.